Good evening. My name is Ellie Gold. I'm the chairman of the Harbour League. I wanted to first acknowledge Delegate Bill Frank, who's here this evening with us. We at the Harbour League believe in a philosophy which combines an appreciation for entrepreneurship, the free market, and lower taxes with respect for civil liberties. Through speakers, roundtables, and other events throughout the year, we intend to explore the political thoughts and ideas. Please, for those of you who haven't done so already, you can take a look at theharborleague.org, which is our website. You can register and so we can send the information regarding our upcoming events. Tonight, I'm very pleased to say that we have here Grover Norquist, one of the most important people in the fight to minimize government control of our lives. In 1985, at the request of then President Ronald Reagan, Mr. Norquist founded the organization Americans for Tax Reform. ATR is a coalition of taxpayer groups, individuals, and businesses opposed to higher taxes at both the federal, state, and local levels. ATR organized the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, which Bill Frank did sign, I'm pleased to say, which asks all candidates for federal and state office to commit themselves in writing to oppose all tax increases. To date, President George W. Bush, 222 House members and 46 senators have taken the pledge. On the state level, 6 governors and 1,247 state legislatures have taken the pledge. Mr. Norquist also serves on the board of directors of the National Rifle Association. He serves on the board of directors of Americans for Conservative Union. He serves as president of American Society for Competitiveness and wrote the book Rock the House, an analysis of the 1994 elections, which has been translated and published in Japanese. In the past, Mr. Norquist has served as a commissioner for the National Commission on Restructuring of the IRS, executive director of the National Taxpayers Union, and executive director of College Republicans. In the words of former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich, Grover Norquist is the person who I regard as the most innovative, creative, courageous, and entrepreneurial leader of the anti-tax efforts and of conservative grassroots activism in America. He has truly made the difference and truly changed American history. Without further ado, Mr. Norquist.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be with you. There is a lot of paper on everybody's chair. You cannot win the world if you don't have enough handouts. And ever since trees killed Sonny Bono, it's been very important to have large quantities of handouts wherever you go. What I did hand out was the list of people, elected officials, and candidates in Maryland who signed the No Tax Increase Pledge. I urge you to hold on to a copy of it, and when you talk to people who want to run for office or are running for office, urge them to take the pledge and to keep the pledge. And then there are a couple of articles that I wrote for the American Spectator. The one, The Perfect Storm, is not yet out, so that's a draft, but the other one is just out. I want to talk about where we are in politics today in the United States, sort of the structure, and what we're up to over the next couple of years, and then take questions. Maryland was sort of in the middle when the Republicans and Democrats picked up teams 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago. We used to be 2 regional parties. If you were born north of the Mason-Dixon line, you were Republican. If you were born south of the Mason-Dixon line, you were a Democrat. And then over time, there was this marbling of immigrant groups that would come over, and when the Irish guy showed up in Boston, the person who was mean to him was a Protestant Republican, so he became a Democrat. And then when the Italians showed up, the guy who was mean to him was the Irish guy, so they became Republicans. This was not a particularly rational way to pick up teams if you're going to try and govern the most powerful nation in the world. And during the lifetime of Ronald Reagan, we actually did have a sorting out of the two political parties in a way that's a lot more rational. And that is largely, if you want larger and more powerful government, you're a Democrat, and if you want more limited government and more individual autonomy and liberty, you're a Republican. And that meant people having to break with their parents and great-grandparents' assigned parties. And there still are some older people who, little old ladies in Mississippi who agree with Ronald Reagan on everything and vote for George McGovern because Sherman had recently been mean to Atlanta. And this was still governing their vote. And similarly, there are older people in Maine who tend to agree with Ted Kennedy on everything, but they vote for George W. Bush because the guy at Little Round Top was a Republican. Both of those tendencies are dying out, and we really are getting to the point where the two parties are more coherent. The modern Republican Party, the modern center-right movement, those people who voted for Reagan, those people who voted for Bush, is made up of groups and individuals that on the issue that moves them to politics, the issue that moves their vote, what they want from the government is to be left alone. So if you put all the Republicans around in a circle, there's a big circle in the middle, and they put one foot in on the issue that moves their vote. You go around the circle. Taxpayers, don't raise my taxes. Property owners, leave my property alone. These are people for whom that issue is the issue that moves their vote. Small businessmen and women, they don't want to be taxed or regulated out of existence. Homeschoolers, I intend to spend time and energy to raise my own kids, and I want the government telling me how to educate my children. The Second Amendment community, gun owners, I'm on the board of the NRA, people who just don't want the government messing with their gun rights. Now, they don't go door to door and urge everybody else to be a hunter. They don't insist that fourth grade kids be taught books entitled Heather Has Two Hunters. They are just asking to be left alone in that zone that's important to them. And it's also why the Republican Party, the conservative movement, has in it all the various communities of faith. This confuses the heck out of the left and some on the right. And that the party can have in it people for whom the most important thing is practicing their faith and raising their kids. They want the government to leave them out of it. And that is why we can have evangelical Protestants, conservative Catholics, Orthodox Jews, Muslims, and Mormons who don't necessarily agree on how you get to heaven or who gets to heaven, but all they want to do is if you leave me alone, you can leave him alone, and we can work together. So around this circle, you have a bunch of people, everybody's got their foot in on the issue that moves their vote. This does not mean that everybody agrees on some 18-point manifesto. I can assure you, as a member of the NRA, that a lot of people who vote on the gun issue have what I consider the oddest views on trade with China. But they don't vote on trade with China, and so at one level, I suppose I care, but at one level I don't care what their views are on trade with China. I do care what they think about the issue that moves their vote. This is what Ronald Reagan understood, and it's what George W. Bush understood. Both of them stood in the middle of that circle and just sort of touched base with everybody in it and said, I'm not going to mess with you on what's most important to you, and I'm not going to mess with you, and I'm not going to mess with you. And they went around, and and that's a governing majority in the modern era. This is a coalition that works well together. We actually have a meeting in Washington, D.C., in a room maybe twice the size of this one, 120 to 140 people in the meeting. We met this morning. Ken Melman of the RNC came over and talked, a couple of congressmen, different folks, 18 presentations in an hour and a half, so people presented pretty quickly. But around that room, we have the entire center-right Leave Us Alone coalition. The coalition people want to be left alone. And in the course of an hour and a half, as long as I can make sure that the gun owners don't try and raise anyone's taxes, and the property owners don't throw prophylactics at the Christians' kids, and the Christians can agree not to steal anyone's guns, we can all get along and go fight the left all week. Nobody in that room or around the circle wants anything of anybody else in the room on their vote-moving primary issue. They're not interfering with anybody else on their primary issues. It is a low-maintenance coalition. Now, the left, ever since the New York Times saw this happening, started going, you've got all these people who go to church and all these people who have jobs, and they're going to fight any minute. And you're thinking, why? Why do you presume that? But the New York Times did presume this. And in point of fact, we can have a whole group of people in a country of 290 million people, if we're going to put together 60% of them, and you have to earn the votes of 60% of Americans, because sometimes your candidate's going to forget to mention DUIs until like the last minute, and you're going to kick away a few votes. And sometimes you're going to run against very hardworking people who are going to get more votes than you think they deserve, and sometimes they're going to steal some votes. So if you want to end up with 51%, you'd better earn 60, and then realize that life and the other team will pull you down from what you earned to what you get on election day. And if we're going to have 60% of the country, we're going to have understand there's an awful lot of well, not everybody's going to agree on 12 points. But if they can agree on to leave each other alone on their central points, then we can work together. And again, they may not have lunch with each other. They don't have to. They don't have to get along. They don't have to agree. The guy who looks across the room, that the guy who fondles his gun, or the guy who counts his money, or the guy who goes to church all day may say, that's weird, I wouldn't do that. You don't have to do that. All we have to do, the only thing we have to do around the circle is show up on the first Tuesday of the first full week in November and vote for the same candidate, okay? Not necessarily for the same reasons. This is Phyllis Schlafly's observation. Everybody's allowed to vote for my candidate for their own reason. It is not necessary that everybody votes for their candidate for the same reason, and if you're waiting for them to do that, you will not govern in the United States. If you want everybody to agree on 18 points, or you can have a small party, and if you're planning on taking power by grabbing the radio stations in the airports, you might be able to do that. But if you're planning on winning 51% of the vote, you're going to have a more expansive definition of your coalition. So our coalition is holding, and again, doesn't have the conflicts that the left expected. Pat Buchanan looked at this coalition in 2000, and he said, I notice, I look at the Republican Party, 70% think we should have fewer immigrants. 70% are skeptics of free trade with China. I, Pat Buchanan, will run in 2000 and get 70% of the vote. I win. He forgot to ask the second question, which is, having told me you think there are too many immigrants, do you vote on that subject? Having told me you're a skeptic on free trade with China, do you vote on that subject? And the answer for Pat Buchanan to both of those questions for most Republicans was no. Okay? And we should never fool ourselves, either as candidates or activists or conservatives or Republicans, into thinking that just because something's like really interesting to us, that other people vote on that subject. And so we always need to make sure that when we're talking to people, that we're talking to them on the vote-moving issue for them, not the really interesting issue to talk about, which may not be at all the vote-moving issue for the person you're talking to. When I was younger and more stupid, I used to go and say, you ought to vote for Ronald Reagan for this, for taxes. Oh, okay. And for school choice. Oh, okay. And I'd keep going until I lost them. Okay. And again, I'd get to an issue and say, everyone should have many guns. Like, oh, no, I don't know about that. And they walk away. Okay. One fish, one hook. You do not need somebody to agree to 7 reasons to vote for your candidate. And in point of fact, there are 2 things. Once you've got the one that moves them, they say, yeah, that's right, that's why I'm voting for Reagan. Move on for 2 reasons. If you keep talking, you could blow the sale. Second, there are other people in the room. Go get their votes. Why have this? What if the guy did agree with you on 10 points? You could have got 10 people, One hook, one vote. and move on. The left has a different kind of coalition, and they have more trouble than we do. Hillary Clinton was quoted in a New York paper saying, you know, we at a fundraiser up in New York, said, we need a meeting like Grover has in D.C. So press guy from New York called and said, what do you think of this? And I said that I guess we're flattered, but the left can't do what we do. Their coalition does not work like ours. And if you were to imagine, and every once in a while the Democrats say, we're doing one of those Wednesday meetings like Grover, we'll have it on Wednesday, as if that was the thing that made it work. I talked to a French guy once who said, oh, we're going to have Silicon Valley. We have lots of valleys. No, that's not what makes Silicon Valley work. Having the valley bit, that's not it. We'll have high taxes and lots of regulation. Everyone will work 34 hours a week, but we have a valley, and that will make it happen. What Hillary wants to do is to have a coalition meeting of the left. And if you can imagine that around the table on the left, who would show up? Trial lawyers, labor unions, big city political machines, government workers. And then you have the coercive utopians, the people who get government grants to come and mess with the rest of our lives. The environmentalist groups that want the toilets to be too small to flush and the cars to be too small to have families in. And you're not supposed to date girls, you're not supposed to wear leather. And they have a whole series of rules for the rest of us, slightly longer than Leviticus. And they really do intend to use the state to enforce them. You say you have to do these things where you separate the white glass from the green glass and the brown glass. And you have to do this on Thursday because that's the Sabbath and the big bus will come then. And anyway, you've got all these rules for other people to follow, and they get government grants to do this for us. Well, around the room on the left's coalition table are all these different people. And they can be happy as long as there's more money coming in the door for the state. So as long as there's more money coming in, they can sit around and be cheerful, like the scene after the bank robbery in the movie. One for you, one for you, one for you. More for everybody. But if we do our job correctly and put our foot on the air hose and say no new resources for you, no more taxes, no new taxes, no more money, then all of the coalition people around that table begin to look at each other like the second to the last scene in the lifeboat movies. They're trying to decide who you throw overboard or who you eat. Because ultimately the left is not made up of friends or allies. It is a collection of competing parasites. And if we don't allow them to gnaw on us, they will turn on each other, okay? And so our job is to never give them more money, make them fight each other and gnaw on each other so that when we see them again in 2 years and 4 years, there are fewer of them and they're shorter, okay? And then we can come back and have another argument. Those are the two competing coalitions in modern American history, in modern American politics. The good news for our team is that our coalition is generally growing and theirs is generally shrinking. And if we keep our foot on the air hose, theirs will shrink faster. When we make the mistake of deciding to raise taxes for some goofy reason, then they get revived. And they not only get revived the way you sort of spray water on wilting plants, they get revived, but they get hope that there'll be, if you had one little tax increase, then there'll be more. And so you've really got them encouraged. And you've got to say no and no, no, again and again and again, so that you not only starve them of the resources, but starve them of the hope that they're ever going to get the resources. And so even conversations about tax increases are a bad idea because they instill the left with the hope that they might get this and they will hold on. Couple of trends. the biggest demographic shift in the last 25 years in the United States is not the number of people whose parents speak Spanish. The biggest demographic shift is the number of Americans who own shares of stock directly, okay? Not in a life insurance or even a pension plan, but own them directly through IRAs, 401ks, mutual funds, and so on. When Reagan was elected in 1980, only 20% of Americans own shares of stock directly, 20%. Today, it's 60% of adults and 70% of voters, and that number grows every year as more and more Americans have defined contribution benefit plans, 401ks, IRAs, rather than General Motors, City of Baltimore defined benefit plans. And this number is growing. You saw IBM announce we're shifting from defined benefit to defined contribution. There are now more Americans with defined contribution plans than defined benefit plans. There is more money today invested in defined contribution plans than defined benefit plans, which is really interesting because defined benefit plans are older people that are more fully funded than defined contribution plans. But there's actually more cash in defined contribution plans, all of which is to say this trend is going to get bigger and deeper and more 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. Owning shares of stock directly changes the electorate. Some really good polling data done by Scott Rasmussen at rasmussenpolls.com. Poll of over 6,000 people. If you own $5,000 worth of stock, or more, as opposed to none, you are 18% more Republican and less Democrat. And that is true on average. African Americans, no stock, 6% Republican. African Americans with $5,000 or more of stock, 20% Republican. How can we do better with the African American vote? It is not to have tea with Jesse Jackson. It is to have more IRAs and more 401ks. This is true for all races, both sexes, all income groups. It's not a question of, oh yeah, sure, guys with stock, they're all rich, they're Republicans. No. Whatever income group you're in, if you own shares of stock, it makes you more Republican. There is one demographic group in America that does not get any more Republican with share ownership. It's already generally Republican, doesn't get any better. This is women who earn more than $75,000 a year. So if you know any women like this, don't give them any stock because it doesn't do any good at all. However, if you buy them a gun, it helps on party identification. And unless you're getting one of the 50 caliber ones, the really cool ones, it's less than the $5,000. But that trend is going to continue indefinitely into the future, creating a more Republican electorate. It is why the Republican solution to every problem in the world, you may have noticed over the last several years, is individual retirement accounts, personal retirement accounts, health savings accounts, education savings accounts, pre-saving for your kids' college education, okay? Because Republicans go, if we can get you to be a saver, then all of a sudden you're more likely to be an R, okay? Why is that? Well, among other reasons, if you own shares of stock directly, all taxes and regulations on business are transparently a tax on you. Whereas if you don't own any shares of stock, looting General Motors it seems like for free, okay? Well, I don't, too bad for them, but it doesn't affect me. But if I own stocks in a mutual fund, and I have 3 mutual funds, I don't have a clue what's in them. I mean, I vaguely did at one point, but they mimic the economy. And so if the government says, today we're going to crush Microsoft, my reaction is, wait a minute, I probably have some of that. Why would I be happy about this? The old speech that Gephardt could give was, and did give, going to loot the big corporations, give everybody in the room $1. And 20% of the people in the room said, uh-oh, that's me, he's looting, but there are not a lot of us, so maybe if we, hide, he won't hurt us too much. And 80% of the people in the room go, I get $1, this is fun, let's play this game again. Today, if Gephardt gives that speech, 60% of the adults in the room, 70% of the voters go, that's my retirement you're looting, I hate you. This is why Gephardt is not president. Couldn't even get the Democratic nomination. So this is very much a different project line. The other challenge the Democrats have is a demographic one. People tend in the United States, when they're about 21, to look around and decide whether they're Republicans or Democrats or where they are in the world of ideas. And then they go back and lead their life, and every 2 or 4 years they may remember to vote, and then they just keep that way. That's where all the 80-year-old ladies from Mississippi came from. They looked at when they were 20, made a decision, and just stayed with their party identification. There are, in the history of the United States, about 6 people who've changed their worldview and their party ID in their 40s, and they've all written tedious books on the subject. But most people don't, okay? And as a result, we had this problem of disappearing Republicans from 1960 to 75, because the people who turned 21 under the Republican era at the beginning of the century were passing away they were the old people from 60 to 75. We used to go vote the old folks' homes in the early 60s. Go to the old folks' homes, Sun City, vote them all, they're all Republicans. And then as the years went by, they started turning into Democrats. What's the matter? The old people don't like us anymore. No, you just have new old people coming into being 65, and they grew up under FDR. And so these people were shifting over, and it looked like the same, they weren't the same people, they were different people. Today, people over 70 years old grew up during the period of FDR's 20 years of Democratic dominance, 32 to 52, and are passing away at the rate of 2.4 million a year. So the Democrats have another decade and a half of disappearing Democrats, disproportionately, not 100%, but disproportionately. This is a Democrat age cohort in the same way that the previous age cohort was a more Republican older age cohort, and down the road are a whole bunch of Reagan Republicans who will be wonderful as long as they're with us, and then at some point we're going to go, oh no, the guys who hit 21 during the Reagan and Carter years will be passing away. We have to go get new ones. So the Ds have a real problem for the next 10 to 15 years on straight demographics, and they can't do anything about that. They can try and stop us from getting Social Security reformed, because the whole Social Security reform is the big enchilada. If we can turn 100% of Americans into savers and investors, if we can say to every 18-year-old, you're going to retire with $300,000 in a bank account, that guy is unlikely to be available to the party of trial lawyers and labor unions. Okay? Why did we win in 2002? In 2002, it was the off-year election. We barely won in 2000 with Bush and Florida and all that sort of stuff. And then in 2002, you had all the scandals, Enron and everything, all the crimes that took place during the Clinton years, discovered during the Bush years, but somehow these were Republican abuses. And I mean, CBS played it that way. And they said that, a business community being corrupt, bad, this is no good. And the Democrats go, we know how to deal with this. But the Republicans won in 2002. Why? Well, because the Democrat position was, Enron stock has gone down, we will send the trial lawyers and the labor unions and the tax collectors in to beat it to death. And people said, wait a minute. My portfolio, my 401k has gone down. I want it to go up. Go hang the guys that stole money from Enron, but I want my market cap to go up, not down. And for 50 years, the Democrats have been explaining to voters that the modern Republican Party will do anything to get stock prices up. They will go out and pollute the earth and club baby seals, and as long as it raises stock prices. And people in 2002 said, well, I'm sorry about the baby seals and everything, but we've really got to get the stock prices up. And as a result, we won in 2002, even though you could say, wait a minute, share ownership being bigger, people will be mad at the in-party because prices are down. The Democrats didn't have a storyline of how they were going to get your stock prices up. So they could say, your stock prices have gone down. People said, yeah, we saw that. And we'll stick the trial lawyers in to kill them. No, don't want that. And Republicans said, your stock prices are down, but we really want them, we're working on making them go up. And we won. The old line after FDR and the Great Depression was there was one number that mattered in American politics: unemployment. And everything was focused on getting the unemployment numbers up. And they did stuff like inflate the currency, which is where we got the second number that people decided was important, which is the inflation rate. And Jimmy Carter said, okay, here's the misery index. Unemployment plus inflation, that's the misery index. That's the number that matters. You take those two numbers together. And he not only enunciated that as a position, he proceeded to double the misery index during his presidency and lose the next election, therefore demonstrating that it was in fact the key number to focus on. And there's now a third number, okay? Unemployment, inflation, and people's wealth. And that's housing and the stock market. And those are the three numbers that people look at. And inflation's been pretty good, which means people don't think about it. If it comes back, they'll think about it. Unemployment's been getting better, and people really do have a sense of what their wealth is and how the stock market's doing and their housing values are doing. All three numbers are important to people's sense of well-being. And as more and more Americans own stock, about 70% of Americans own houses, those numbers are going to become increasingly important. What I do at Americans for Tax Reform, what we started to do in '86, was to do the no tax increase pledge. We ask every candidate to sign a pledge never to raise taxes. The purpose of this was to brand the Republican Party as the party that would never raise your taxes. We now have 221 members of the House who've signed the pledge never to raise taxes. That's 95% of all the Republicans in the House, and 2 Democrats. And in the Senate, we have 46 senators, all Republicans. 85% of all Republican senators have signed the pledge. And 100% of the presidents, Republican presidents, have signed the pledge. You can go into the voting booth dead drunk, and as long as you vote for the Republican who's running for Congress or Senate, you're pretty sure he or she will never raise your taxes, because we branded the Republican that way. At the state level, a third of Republicans in state legislatures have signed the pledge never to raise taxes. And our job over the next 10 years is to take 1/3 up to 2/3 to 80 and 90%, so that you can have that certainty level at the state level that we have at the federal level. Why do we hold the House and the Senate? Even all sorts of things happen to make voters nervous, wars in Iraq, stock prices, all that stuff, and we keep the House. Because people know that the R's won't raise their taxes. It's a huge advantage. When Coca-Cola spends a lot of time on quality control, because they want you to be able to walk through the store and pick up the bottle of Coke without looking at it and put it in your basket and keep going, okay? You don't have to take the bottle and look at it or taste it or ask your friends what they think about it or shake it. You know what's in it because you know they do quality control. Were you to take your bottle of Coke home and get halfway through it and notice a rat head in the Coke bottle, you wouldn't simply say to yourself, well, I don't think I'll finish this one. It might affect your decision about buying a bottle of Coke the next day. And you would tell all your friends, there was a Coke rat head in my Coke bottle. And you go on local TV and you'd show all your friends the rat head. And it would be very damaging to Coca-Cola, okay? Because it damages the brand. Republicans who vote for tax increases are rat heads in the Coke bottle. They are damaging the brand for all other Republicans. This is not a victimless crime, okay? Some Republican congressman over in the corner raising taxes, and he's not just drinking himself to death. You go, oh, that's too bad, but it's just him. No, he's hurting everybody. This is not a victimless crime. And this is why it's very important for the modern conservative movement, the Republican Party, to police the tax issue and make sure that our guys never, because all you have to do is raise taxes every once in a while, and people lose the certainty, the ability to go in and just vote for the R and move on for these things. And we've had some real unfortunate situations recently. The governor of Alabama, good Republican, Riley, got elected governor, turned around, tried to have $1 billion tax increase. Had to put it on the ballot, because in Alabama everything has to go on the ballot. because everything's in the Constitution, and put this $1 billion on the ballot, and then they did something which you're going to hear a little bit more of. I just heard it in Texas Monday, and that was that this tax increase, Jesus of Nazareth was for this tax increase. The tax increases are a Christian thing to do, and you should be doing that. Luckily, due to the growing numbers of Hindus in Alabama, this tax increase was defeated 68-32. But the other team will keep coming up with new reasons to raise taxes, and their politicians and taxes are like teenage boys on prom night. They keep asking the same question different ways, and you have to keep saying no again and again and again. But what if there was a flood? Then no. Okay. And when we consistently say no, the Republican Party becomes the dominant party. And we've seen that at the national level, and there's a lot of work to be done at the state and local level on that issue as well. With that, let me take questions, arguments, thoughts, observations. Sir, yes.
Yeah, Grover, thank you for your comments. I agree with everything you said. I guess a lot of us as conservatives are disillusioned with the Republicans in Congress, the level of spending, the lack of a reform agenda. Back in 1994, the Gingrich Revolution with the momentum and the contract with America, a lot of that has been lost over the years. What do we need to do to get that back to where we were 10, 12 years ago? That sense of momentum and reforming things and not spending so much money, and the highway pork bill, the litany goes on and on and on. What do we need to do?
Well, you got your finger on the exact right question. Here's the challenge with spending. I described the makeup of the modern center-right coalition. Everyone with their foot in on the issue that moves their vote. You go around that room. What do I want? Americans for Tax Reform. Cut taxes. We get a tax cut every year out of this president. Oh, and please spend less. And the guy over here, don't regulate or tax my business out of existence, and please spend less. Don't steal my guns, and please spend less. Leave me alone when I go to church, and spend less. Everybody's for spending less. It's nobody's primary vote-moving issue. When you spend too much money, nobody goes, I'm out of here. Okay? If the President of the United States said, well, we're going to steal everyone's guns, there would be guys who go, we're gone. We're not here anymore. Okay? Because it's a deal breaker. Our challenge is we don't have an institution that makes the spending issue a deal breaker. Now, over time, spend too much, then I guess we're going to have to raise some taxes to do this. Okay, now you got a fight on your hands. But until that point, they don't, okay? Or we spend too much money and now we're going to inflate the currency to make up for it. And then you've got the savers and the business guys mad at you. So what spending leads to can kill a political party, a candidate, and a movement, but the spending doesn't. Remember the politicians used to say, nobody's lost because of the deficit? No, that's true, but nobody lost because of spending is the problem. And so we have to figure out how we discipline ourselves now on spending in order to not have the fatal crack up that comes from inflation or tax increases caused by the spending. Because the spending won't kill you politically. It irritates your own team, but your own team getting irritated doesn't mean they go home, doesn't mean they quit, doesn't mean they join the other team or splinter off to a different party. George Herbert Walker Bush spent too much money, but when he raised taxes, it was a deal cutter. That was the visible thing. And this is not easy. This is a very difficult problem. I get all the time people say, well, we should do a pledge on spending like you do on taxes. Oh, really? How would we write it? I pledge not to spend too much money. Right? I mean, if you were to take a rope down to D.C. to hang the guy who was spending too much money, who would you hang? You know? I mean, everybody touched the ball. Nobody touched it last. You know, nobody ever, today we're going to vote on spending too much money. They don't. This committee and that committee and this committee and that committee, and the two committees have different numbers, and then they meet and they have a different number. And when did it happen? You know, where's the target? It is as if it was designed to make it difficult to have accountability. And whether it was designed that way or not, it is that way. There are a few things that we've done right on spending. Base Closings Commission, where they agree to set up the commission and the commission votes to close down bases, and then unless you vote no, it happens. We've had 6 or 7 of those, and every one of them has come up with real spending restraint. This administration has done competitive sourcing, where the guys who mow the lawn at the Pentagon every 3 years have to bid against the guys who mow the lawn at the Marriott for that job. When you put the job for bid, whether it goes to the outside people or stays with the present government workers, you drop 1/3 of the cost. Because the guys who were the government come up with a better way to do it because they know they have to compete. It's like being in the private sector. And there are 800,000 jobs that could be competitively sourced. If we do them all, we save $25 billion. And that's one of the projects we're working on. And it's very important. And it needs to be done. Now, the good news and bad news. With the Abramoff scandal, there's a call for reform, but real reform has nothing to do with lobbying and everything to do with spending. The reason why that guy Duke Cunningham had trouble was that he was capable of giving millions and tens of millions of dollars in contracts to people because you had earmarks. Well, when you have that, how long does it take before somebody figures out how to pay you to get that money? Okay? And human nature being what it is, it's not fair to expect a congressman, you may hand out tens of millions of dollars, but never ask anything in return for it. How long does that last? If you had $1 billion in gold and you put it in the middle of the room, how many guards and fences and locks would you need to keep the $1 billion in gold safe? Okay, whole books are written on the fact that they will find a way to get your gold. Don't care how many locks you do. What you need to do is have no gold in the room and then leave the door open. Okay? The idea we'll have lots of regulations on lobbyists and campaign guys, that's putting more walls and locks to guard the $1 billion. You ought not to have billions of dollars to be given away. And so we need to cut down spending, and particularly the earmarks, where congressmen get to say, please give this to Fred, okay? Please give this to my alma mater, $10 million. Get rid of those earmarks. Reduce total government spending, and you'll have less corruption. We do both. And I believe we can and will. There's some really good proposals that have been put forward. I met Monday night with Gingrich in Texas. He had a bunch of ideas, and I was working through my list as well. I believe we should term limit all membership on the appropriations committees to 6 years, so that no congressman ever becomes a spender for his entire life. You'll be a spender for 6 years, then you do other stuff. And while you're a spender, while you're on the appropriations for 6 years, you can be famous for not spending. But not if you're going to do it for your entire career. You can't be the non-spender at the spending committee. I believe that we should do what Jeff Flake has done. And now I'm going to give you, not necessarily exactly, his idea with a couple things added to it. Right now, appropriation bills have earmarks. They're not in the bill. They're often a committee report that may not be written when the bill passes, okay? So what this does, what the rule would do is say, if you have an earmark, it has to be in the bill. So you can flip through the bill. Today we're going to vote on bill. Has to be written down, has to be in there for people to look at. You have to put it online 3 days before there's a vote so that everyone can go look at it. And my addition to this, your name has to be attached to it. This is Fred's earmark, okay? And I want a lifetime ban on you or anyone on your staff going to work for Fred, whether Fred is a city, a town, a business, a person, or a university. What these guys do is they prepay their retirement. They earmark money to their local university. Oh, there's no corruption, no campaign contributions, see? No strings, right? And then when they retire, they get a $400,000 a year job from the university. That's not corruption. But so there are a number of things that we can do that really damage the left and help do what we want on spending, and also remove the occasion to sin that causes real potential corruption problems. Now, Jack Gameroff's an old friend of mine. We went to college together. I helped get him elected head of college Republicans, and it's very sad what's happened. What really irritated me when I heard about this was that 43% of the money he gave to candidates went to Democrats. And I'm going, Jack, what was that all about? Well, right now I'm kind of glad that was the approach he took. And the good news is that while Jack has friends who are Republican congressmen like Dana Rohrabacher, to whom he'd write a $500 check, even though Dana was on no committee and had nothing to do with any of Jack's work, he never wrote a check to a Democrat who wasn't buying something. Every one of those checks is completely corrupt, because Jack would never write a check to a Democrat just because. And so I think this will end up being a lot more bipartisan than the left would. And you see that every once in a while you read these articles, this really is a Republican scandal. And you're going, why are you so insistent on saying that? Well, because they know it's not true. Watch Reed of Nevada. Watch Dorgan of North Dakota. There's some real corruption problems there. And the idea that the Democrats are ever going to run the corruption honesty issue as a national campaign, oh, you say the Democratic Party, the party of Louisiana, New Jersey, Chicago, and Tennessee is going to run as the clean party. It was always testimony to the fact that they had nothing else to talk about. This wasn't the frosting on the cake. This was the whole thing. It was their whole argument. They don't have anything else to talk about. The only time they were winning in this last year was when they shut up, and stuff was going problematic in Iraq and all this, and Katrina and all this bad stuff was happening. And the piece I wrote there about the perfect storm is about like 8 problems that all hit the Republicans at once. And as long as the Democrats shut up, we were bleeding from all pores. And then they decided to say, well, let's tell you what we'd do on Iraq. And then all of a sudden their numbers started tumbling because they were, Because what it used to be was they'd say, what do you think of Bush in Iraq? They said, well, I don't like it very much. No, that's not good. Now it is, well, given what's going on in Iraq, do you want Bush to run it from now on or Howard Dean to run it from now on? We do a lot better on the second question than the first question. And the good news is on elections, it's always, how's your wife? Well, compared to what? Okay, what do you think of Bush? Well, compared to what? As long as we don't want a referendum on our candidates in 2006, we want elections, choices, and we need the other team to talk. Yes, and then, sir.
Robert, considering what you told us about the increasing percentage of those who are getting into the stock market and so forth, of the electorate and stuff, why do you think the president had such a difficult time trying to sell this private account thing? Why didn't that take off at the grassroots level, despite what was being said about it?
The President of the United States, George Bush, ran in 2000 saying, Social Security is working for older Americans. It's going to be increasingly problematic for younger Americans. Because when it was set up, it was a Ponzi scheme. And it required everyone to die at 67, so the actuarial tables would work out, and have 12 kids. And if everyone was willing to play along, this would work forever, okay? But then the old people double-crossed us and started living longer, and they quit having 12 kids, and now we have to do something different, okay? And that's why everybody has to self-invest, okay? And then you live to 120. That's fine. That's good, okay? And however many kids you want is cool too. Although Republicans should have more. Which is another demographic problem the Ds are having. So that was the argument. And he said, I'm never going to raise your taxes to fix the Social Security problem. And I'm not going to cut your benefits. And I am going to offer younger people personal accounts. That was the deal. That polls at 70+% support. And the younger you are, the more support it has. Okay? And it doesn't scare the retired people because you just told them this isn't going to affect you. Okay? And so this worked well in 2000, 2002, and 2004. We went in 2004, and they come up and they start negotiating with imaginary Democrats who don't exist, who would vote for this. And they said, well, because we need 60 votes, because the other team will filibuster. Why will the Democrats filibuster? Okay, because they understand that if you pass Social Security reform and every American is going to be in the stock market, their party's over. It's finished. They're done. The party of trial lawyers and labor unions is gone. They can be the weird sex party. They can be the tree hugger party. They cannot be the trial lawyer labor union party in a country where everybody's going to retire with hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank. So the other team is not stupid. They're evil, okay? And we can't talk them into committing suicide. There's that great scene in Hannibal Lecter, Silence of the Lambs, where he talks the guy in the other cell into swallowing his own tongue. Okay, if we could do that with the Democrats, that would be very helpful. But they won't cooperate. They will not do this for us. They will filibuster to stop us from having personal accounts. Because they know not because they think it won't work, because they know perfectly well it will work. It'll make everybody rich and happy and independent, and they'll be in trouble, okay? So they really don't want this, which means you have to have 60 Republicans in the Senate to do it. And as soon as the election was over and we had 55 Republicans, it wasn't going to happen. But the White House suffered from hubris. We just won an election. We will now go negotiate with those Democrats who will do this for us. And what would they in negotiating with these imaginary Democrats, they said, well, we'd consider a tax increase and we'd consider benefit cuts. And all of a sudden, support for Social Security collapsed because we changed what we were for, lusting after these imaginary Democrats. And for 6 months, the president was there seen Weekend at Bernie's, right? He had Social Security over here, and he kept poking it. It's still alive, hey, it was dead. Not because of anything we did wrong, but because we didn't have 60 votes. So it was just sitting there. Hi, and Social Security is doing just fine. No, it's not. When I poke it, it moves. And finally, they sort of wandered away. And now, when the same thing happened to Harriet Myers, she was able to say, okay, I'm toast, I'm out of here. Social Security couldn't say anything, so we had to walk away from it when people recognized that it wasn't going anywhere. It was a tactical and a strategic mistake, and I talked to really smart people, and I couldn't talk them out of doing what they did. They wanted it done. Now, here's the challenge. It's not going to happen until we have 60 votes. But Bush will get credit for it. But it won't happen when Bush is president. Who won the Cold War? Ronald Reagan won the Cold War. When did Ronald Reagan win the Cold War? 1991, after he'd been out of office for 3 years, okay? Well, because he set it up, he told us, he did all the things to make it happen, and the whole world knows he did it. Just because it happened when, some other guy was in the White House, doesn't mean he doesn't get credit. Eventually, we will do personal accounts, and they'll be called W accounts, and your grandchildren will know that George W. Bush did this in the same way that Ronald Reagan ended the Cold War. So the bad news for Bush is it's not going to happen while you're president, because we're not going to have the 60 votes. The good news is it will happen, and you will get credit for it. So stop trying to get it done right now. But I understand if you're the president, you've only got 4 years, we must do this now, I promised people, but it leads to bad decisions. Yeah.
I'd like to hear your thoughts about genuine tax reform. I look at the Bro and Mack Commission from last year, and they really came out with a whole lot of nothing. The alternative minimum tax that we have today is a travesty. And you look at the complexity that we have in our tax code, it's unintelligible for people with PhDs to read it and understand it. What are the odds that we're ever going to see something that you can do on a postcard?
Okay. The goal for Republicans on tax reform is to get to a single rate tax that taxes income one time. Okay? Right now, we tax income many times. When you save it, when you invest it, when you put it in a company, when you get it in a dividend, if you're stupid enough to die, they take half. Okay? They keep coming and biting at the apple. And what we want to say is you can watch us earn it and steal a certain percentage, or you can watch us spend it and steal a certain percentage. But you can't follow us around the whole time and keep looking at us and want to know how many cars in the garage and how much gold in our teeth when we die and all this. No, you can't. No. Just watch us earn a dollar, take some, spend a dollar, take some, go away. And we are getting there. We are 2 votes short of abolishing the death tax, but we will abolish the death tax. We just need 2 more Republicans in the Senate. We almost got rid of the double taxation of dividend income. We went from 35% down to 15%. Somebody ever asked you, well, the Iraq war is expensive. I'll tell you it's expensive. We could have had 0% on double taxation dividend income, but they told everybody how much the Iraq war cost right in the middle of our discussion with Congress about getting that through, and so it got cut in half. I wish they'd. Could we talk about that next month? Okay. But we almost got it, and we will abolish the double taxation of dividend income. We will go to expensing so that business investment is not depreciated over long periods of time, but expensed in the first year. We'll move to tax income one time. We will have universal IRA so that all your savings is tax-free. We will abolish the capital gains tax. And these things, we will not do this all at once. We'll do a little bit each time. We'll keep taking a bite at the apple. We'll keep taking a slice of the salami. And if you look at all of Bush's tax cuts, they've all been baby steps towards just that. Tax income one time. Then the other thing is tax income at one rate. Okay? Why do we want to tax income at one rate? This is not a question of fairness. Taxation is taking money from people who earned it and giving it to people who didn't. Fairness is not part of this equation. You can do it less destructively, less painfully, less stupidly, but fair isn't part of this project. The reason we're on a tax income at one rate is that when you have everybody taxed at the same rate and the politicians want to spend more money, they have to look at everybody in the room and say, I've got a really good idea and you're all paying for it. Okay, we're all listening. Tell us about this. I'm originally from Massachusetts. When I was young, we emigrated to the United States, but earlier we were in Massachusetts, which has by constitution a flat rate income tax. You cannot have a graduated income tax in the state of Massachusetts. 5 times the forces of international Bolshevism, people of Massachusetts, have put on the ballot moving to a graduated income tax. The legislature has, or through the initiative process. 5 times. Every time the people of Massachusetts voted down. Very sophisticated argument. Yeah, year 1 you raise Teddy Kennedy's taxes and cut mine, but as soon as we're at different rates, you can over time raise his and mine, and we'll all end up paying more if we're not linked together. Okay? This is what Bill Clinton did in '93. He said, I'm only going to raise taxes on the richest 2%, so the rest of you pay no attention, go in the other room, you don't want to hear this, it won't be fun. But it's not you, it's just these 2%. And when he was done with that, he came back for the guys with cars, and then he came back for the guys who got Social Security, and he divided the electorate into different groups and mugged them one at a time. This is the Richard Speck theory of tax increases, that if you can't take on everyone in the room at once, you take them out of the room one at a time. And our goal is to say, one rate, treat us all the same, and if you want to raise our taxes, you got to take us all on at once, and if you want to cut our taxes, you're doing it for everybody at once. And we may say, I've got a really great idea, and we're going to raise your taxes. Okay, and if we buy it, we'll do that. But it's less likely to be the sale than if I tell you I'm going to give you something and Fred's going to pay for it, not you. So that's the fundamental tax reform that everybody in the center right is moving towards, and they're just going to do it in baby steps. We do not have the trust of the American people to say, trust us, we're going to go in the other room, make 350 changes, and bring it back, and you'll love it. Do it here so we can watch you. Kill the death tax. Expand IRAs. Do them piece by piece so we can see what you're doing, so we can see your hands, okay, while you're doing it. And that's the way we're getting it done. And it is happening slowly, but everything happens slower than you'd like.
I think we have time for one more question.
Tell you what, there are a couple hands. I will take all the questions together and answer them as one question.
You had talked about the need for 60 U.S. senators. Why isn't Jeb Bush running for Senate in Florida? It seems like he's the only one who could really beat the Democratic incumbent. And what do you think of the potential Republican candidates in 2008
Okay. Was
for
there another?
president?
Good question.
I will. Was there another hand back here? Yes, no?
Bonner for the Speaker of the House, replace Delay. Would you like to comment on that? The Chapman, Ohio.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. Which one? Sorry.
Yes, thank you. Piggybacking on your comment, why don't you have the confidence or the faith of the American people? You know, you're talking baby steps, and you have to keep your hands. But what is up with the American populace that they don't trust this?
Okay, good. First of all, the long answer to the question of the 2008 field is a 3,000-word essay that I did here, okay? That's really good. And the short version of that is that the Democrats nominate Hillary Clinton, okay? And nothing stops that. The Democratic, you can already see the Democratic primary fight. 8 guys up on the dais, Hillary Clinton's chair 4 inches higher than everybody else's chair, 7 Democrat guys all running for office saying things like, well, I was thinking today how bright and articulate and wonderful Senator Clinton is, and it reminded me that Joe Biden's an idiot. And so they'll sit there sucking up to Hillary, running for vice president, and kicking the other guy under the table. And it won't work. So, and you know, they talk about Warner of Virginia, the Democrat who ran. This is silly. Warner ran as the guy is a pro-business Democrat who wouldn't raise your taxes. He got elected, he raised your taxes. You know, the idea that you can run that same shtick for president, having run it once falsely for governor, is unlikely. See, when the Greeks took over Troy, there's a reason they didn't take over the rest of Asia Minor with the Trojan horse trick, because everybody was onto it after Troy. They did knock knock, hi, can we have our horse come in? The next city said no, and I don't think that Warner's going to be able to sell the hi, I'm a moderate Democrat, I wouldn't raise your taxes thing again. On the Republican side, look, there are lots of interesting candidates. The one who stands most comfortably in the middle of the center-right coalition right now is George Allen. He's on good terms with everybody. Everyone else is a little bit off somewhere. You have Giuliani, who's from New York City and has all the sort of odd things that go with that, but has certain strengths as well. You have McCain, who lost the last time when he was pro-taxpayer and pro-gun, and now he's anti-taxpayer and anti-gun and against the president's judicial picks, or at least not willing to support them through fighting the filibuster. I think that becomes less of a likely possibility as a result. You have the gentleman from Massachusetts, Romney, and there you have to find out whether being a Mormon is an asset or not, because you've got both the fact that the Southern Baptists think it's a cult and problematic, but what Romney has is the advantage that Howard Dean had. He has a national network. Howard Dean ran, everyone go, where'd that come from? How come he had this national network? Well, when he came out for gay civil unions, all these people got on the internet, and everyone goes, oh, we use the internet. Everybody has the internet. But what he had was, because he'd done the gay civil union thing, the gay community said, hey, this guy's okay. And the Washington Post had on the front cover of the Washington Post that every single fundraiser that Dean had in 2002 and most of 2003 was organized by the gay community because of what he'd done in Vermont. So that he had a national network. I want to do a fundraiser in Miami. Well, Fred knows Joe. Okay, and you had someone organize it. And the Mormons are the same thing, similar numbers, more clustered in Utah than San Francisco, but similar coverage of the country. So that he would be a national candidate faster than anyone else because of that networking. Jeb Bush would clear the field if he'd run. I don't think he runs for family and personal reasons. I've talked to him. I think he should run. I've urged him to run. You do get the what about the dynasty question. And my argument to him is the only year you can run when nobody can bring up the dynasty thing with a straight face is the year you run against Hillary Clinton. They can't, even the New York Times can't go, we must not elect the president's brother. No, we must elect the president's wife. I'm for running Jeb. I mean, the downside is that the Syrians, the North Koreans, and the Egyptians will all make fun of us. They go, oh, I get this presidential thing. The Mubarak Jr. gets to be president too, right? And I said, no. Trying to convince the rest of the world that we don't just hand this stuff down, it will take a while. But I'm willing to make that sacrifice if Jeb is. You want long shots? Watch the governor of South Carolina, a real hero on spending, Sanford. Governor of Texas, Rick Perry, very, very strong candidate. He took $10 billion out of that state's budget when he became governor, cleaning up after somebody or other who was governor just before him. So he's been a real hero on the spending front, and is a deer hunter, not one of these, pheasant hunters. There's some real opportunities there. Condi Rice, I like Condi. I talked to her. She called me before she became Secretary of State, and just to talk, because she was going to go do the Senate stuff, and I mentioned to her how much appreciative I was of her very strong Second Amendment positions that she's enunciated over the years. She's very good on guns. The challenge is, the presidency is not an entry-level position, and running for office is not the same thing as doing things. Because when you apply for a job or do a job, you never have somebody standing next to you going, he's an idiot, he's a moron, which is what happens in politics. It's very different, right? Normally you go apply for a job and you get it or you don't. You don't have some guy standing at the side going, he's a jerk, It's hard to concentrate when they're doing this to you the whole time. And it's not clear whether Condi would react poorly, as most of us would, to people doing that to you, or would act like a natural candidate. You kind of can't risk that. Could you be appointed to the vice presidency? Yeah. Could you continue as Secretary of State? Could you go run for Senate or governor and then do something? I tend to think we really need somebody to run for office before, because you never know what a glass jaw looks like in politics. And I'm a big fan of Condi Rice's, but I just would not urge anyone to try and run somebody that hadn't run before. DeLay, I think it is very helpful to the Republican Party that DeLay is stepping down, simply because the other guys have gone after him so hard. It is a tribute to DeLay and the work he's done to build the Republican majority that just as when Gingrich moved on, it did not sidetrack the competence level and the determination of the Republican caucus. DeLay, I'm going to be very clear. There's not a criticism. It is praise to say that somebody has created a set of institutions that when they leave, they don't collapse, okay? Gingrich did this, and DeLay has done that, and when Hastert retires in 2 or 4 years, the Republican caucus will function well, because we've got deep benches there, which is a very good thing. Who will replace DeLay? Right now, Blunt is one guy from Missouri. The other is Boehner, are the two who are running right now. Thomas may run, the head of Ways and Means Committee. These are all good guys. What I hope we'll have is a virtuous competition among them to be the most pro-reform person possible. And I just got an email from somebody saying that Boehner had just signed on to an idea that we were working on this morning, and now we got to go see whether Blunt will do it too. I'm hopeful that we'll have a healthy competition. We'll get the most significant reform that we can, and then we'll get new leadership there, and DeLay will probably just go on to do something else. And as Gingrich will tell you, I mean, Gingrich is happier in getting all sorts of stuff done. You don't have to be in Congress to have a life. And that's a very healthy thing for people to learn. And the last question was trust. Why do the American people not trust us to go into a back room and make thousands of changes? Because they're not stupid. We should never trust politicians to do that. And that's why it was so offensive when Bush said, "Trust me on Harriet Miers." What do you mean, trust you? This is not the deal. Loyalty runs two ways. You promised us a Bo Derek 10 of judicial nominees. And there are 8 of them that have been vetted for years, Alito being one of them, Roberts being another one. We had a whole bunch of Bo Derek 10s, and you bring us this fuzzy picture of Anne of Cleves and say, she's very cute, trust me, okay? And no, trust you. No, that's not the deal. We didn't sign up for that. And eventually, Cromwell, who had recommended Anne of Cleves, lost his head. But politicians should never say, trust me. I mean, it's just wrong, because that's not the agreement we have with them. We trust the Constitution, okay, and we have guns. And and we trust you to keep both in mind. And so much better to do 10 tax cuts that, like ice sculpture or something, and you do this and then do that, and you get to what you're getting at. But I just don't trust them to say, and do it all at once, because it won't happen that way. Too many trade-offs. But I think we're on track to do the right thing. We just need 20 more Republican congressmen and about 5 more Republican senators to get a whole bunch of stuff done. And I think we're on track to do that. I mean, remember when we gerrymandered the Senate by having all those wonderful square states out west that have like 3 people living in them, 2 of them are Republican senators and one's a Republican congressman. And when we win 50% of the electorate for the presidency, we're carrying 30 states. So there are 30 red states and 20 blue states. That means there should be, if everybody was paying attention, 60 Republican senators and 40 Democratic senators. Our problems are North and South Dakota, Nebraska, Montana. We've got to fix that. Last time around, we fixed 5 southern states. You know, remember the black belt in the South? The 5 states had 5 Ds there, and we replaced them with 5 Rs. So the Senate will move that way. On the House side, there are 18 House seats that have Republicans in them that Kerry carried. There are 41 House seats that have Democrats in them that Bush carried. So over time, we're going to pick up another 20 seats. But that's, so we just need to keep working on doing that.
You mentioned Ms. Myers. I'm just intrigued. What's your gut reason on why the president chose her? I don't think we understand.
I don't understand, and if I knew, I couldn't tell you. So I'm allowed to speculate. Nothing pretty. One is they were so scared that they thought they were so weak. Because remember, this came at a time that they were getting battered, that they just thought they had to put out a weak candidate because they couldn't put out a strong candidate. That's horrible to think. Another one is that it was completely the opposite. It was hubris. This pleases Caesar. This will please you because it pleases Caesar. Do it because I like it. What are you talking about? Trust me, trust me. No. There were no good reasons for it. That's why it was so frightening and it so scared the president's friends. Because it's like a guy after a stroke and they start talking funny and you don't know how bad it is in there. It was horrific. And the good news is, they went out, it didn't work, and They backed right away from it, and they moved right on with a very, very solid candidate. And she was a disappointment, not an act of treason. Okay, he did not break with the tax increase into that treason. Okay, breaking your word on purpose. No. But this was. What do you think of this? When somebody shows you something god awful that they made in art class, and oh, it's very sweet, but it didn't work, and nobody to this day quite understands it. Some people suggest his wife said, "Oh, they should all be widowers. This is the rule on people who run for office." It's always a mistake when they turn for independent justification to somebody who'll fib to them. Good to see you guys.
I want to thank Grover Norquist, who's very good and inspiring. I know Tom Bernier has a few words he wanted to say. And also, following that, we will invite everybody to our reception.
5 seconds in the plug. First of all, obviously thank you for coming, especially those who came to our first event. The most important thing you can do to support our organization is to keep coming. If you make sure that we have your email address, we will make sure that you get a notice about everything we're up to and everything we're doing and every event we're sponsoring. So it's real important that if you haven't, visited our website and given us your email address, that you do so we can keep you in the loop. Also, this isn't a group that we are looking for membership in. We're planning, many future events, and we're going to try to build this into something really spectacular. We also have a drawing tonight we'd like to do. I don't know if Grover, did he walk out? Okay, well we can do that for our Ronald Reagan Award raffle. Want to do that now? Come on up. We'll go out right now. 50/50 raffle. For those of you who didn't know, this benefits the Ronald Reagan Award, which goes to some high school students that will compete in a competition later on in the spring.
And the winner gets $30.
That's the 50/50. Maybe we got the tickets? Got my glasses? The winning number, 192672. Really? Hey. All right. Tommy Brown. Thank you, Tom. Thank you.
I thank everybody for coming, and everybody is invited to the next room over for a reception.